So we're at about the halfway point in the 2023-24 football calendar, and the question must be asked: has the Saudi Pro League's recruitment ruined football? How much has it really affected you? I don't know about you, but it hasn't really reached me at all. I could watch the matches on DAZN in Canada, but aside from that, I rarely ever see anything about it. For all of the top names that agreed to a move to play in Saudi Arabia, there are plenty that turned it down as well. But for those that did make the move, how has it affected the growth of the league? Has it improved the popularity of the sport within Saudi Arabia as a whole? Have other teams benefit from the surge of signings? Or are things relatively the same for them, bar when they play the big boys? What's up, guys, and welcome to Rabona TV. Well, I haven't been speaking about the Saudi Pro League on the channel. I have been keeping a close eye on it and how the massive wave of signings from last summer has affected the league as a whole. So in this video, we'll look at how the Saudi Pro League has grown in notoriety around the world, whether attendances are up in the country or unaffected, and how that compares to other Asian leagues as well. We're only about a year into this massive project now, so everything in this video will be said with a "it's still early though, things may change over time" asterisk, depending on how the public investment fund decides on where to throw the money. And by the way, checking in on Adrian's closet of curiosities, I really need to be consistent with the name here. But today we are wearing the Gelang International FC away kit, a beauty. I was wearing their home kit in a recent Barcelona video that I released, but these guys play in the Singapore Premier League and both the home and away are nice, of which I got thanks to our friends at Sangalo. Sangalo have a massive sale right now, for example, this kit. So if you want to grab some official unique kits from around the world, such as clubs from Laos, Zimbabwe, India, and more, just use the link in the description and grab them now before the sale ends at the end of this month. And so guys, all of my sources are listed below. There's some cool stuff down there like a map of the clubs, etc. So do check them out if you want to dive deeper on this, and let's go. In case you forgot, which I doubt any of you have, the Saudi Pro League spent a lot this summer. Not only do they provide a get out of jail free card for clubs who are looking to offload some of their aging talent that cost them a lot of money still on wages, of which a few Premier League clubs took that offer, but they also picked off a few young'uns as well. I'm talking about Gabri Vega, you could lump Ruben Neves in there, Jota, Alan Saint-Maximin. There was a few of these younger players that ended up going as well. It wasn't all just old boys. Now, there were definitely some cheaper moves for players who were in the final year of their contract, as well as free transfers such as Benzema heading to Al-Ittihad, but the spending was still quite high. Of course, the Premier League outspent everybody by double, which reminds me of how funny it was seeing some English pundits complain about the spending from the Pro League. Some, not all, of course. Humanitarian arguments aside, looking strictly at the spending, it's funny to see fans of English clubs complain about their talent being picked off when that's, well, what the rest of Europe has to put up with when the Premier League clubs come calling for their talent. Similarly, South American clubs get rated by Portuguese and Spanish clubs all the time, but anyway, bit of a tangent there. As you can see here, thanks to this graph from Bloomberg, the Premier League spent twice as much as the rest of the leagues, with France coming close thanks to PSG spending about 350 million euros in the summer, and on it goes. Now, Saudi Arabia's spending follows suit, with them investing greatly in sport to make Saudi Arabia more relevant on the world stage for things outside of their oil exports, to diversify in a sense. There are also tourism campaigns that Ronaldo and Messi are a part of to bring people to the country. And of course, you can't escape those sports washing allegations from humanitarian groups as well, who point to the mass executions that are still occurring in the country, as the rate of executions has doubled in the last 6 years. I won't go into that further. That was just to contextualize what some believe the reasons for the sudden investment in sport is for. But again, there are links to stories below if you'd like to read it yourself. Though I'd be very surprised if you haven't heard all about this already, considering how much of a big topic this was in the summer. Now, it was announced in June of 2023 that the Public Investment Fund, or the PIF, would take up 75% control of the 4 most successful clubs in the country: Al-Nassr, Al-Hilal, Al-Ali, and Al-Ittihad. The remaining 25% would be controlled by the existing boards at the respective clubs, sort of set up as a non-profit. Other companies from Saudi Arabia had some ownership changes as well, as they try to boost the investment in other clubs such as Al-Qadsiya, Al-Diriyah Club, Al-Ola Club, and Al-Sukur FC. However, when you look at the most high-profile signings, they have all gone to the PIF-funded clubs, the golden boys of the league, essentially. In fact, I was curious as to what percentage that foreigners make up in the Saudi Pro League now, and it's still dominated by local talent, which is kind of cool to see. 70% Saudi Arabian players and 30% foreigners, according to Transfermarkt. For comparison, La Liga has 41% foreigners, the Premier League sits at 68.2%, wow, Serie A at 63.3%, etc. Reason for the Saudi Pro League being low comparatively? Look at where many of the foreign players are signing. You have teams like Al-Nassr, who in their most recent match against Al Riyadh had just 4 Saudi Arabian players in the starting lineup, while Al Riyadh had the inverse, just 4 foreigners. Now, as far as the league's strength overall after this investment, there isn't an exact science to calculating this, but the stats gods over at Opta used a variety of metrics to come up with a world ranking of leagues. And while the Saudi Pro League has climbed, perhaps not as much as it would have liked, as it's ranked as the 27th best league in the world, just behind the South Korean league and just ahead of the Israeli league. One thing that I found interesting, which speaks to the lopsided nature of the SPL as a whole, is that Opta analysts did a direct comparison between MLS and SPL, and found that if you were to combine the two leagues into a single league for the sake of ranking the clubs, 3 of the 4 top teams would be SPL teams: Al Ittihad, Al Hilal, and Al Nassr. No surprise there with the players they brought in. However, at the opposite end, 13 of the 14 lowest ranked teams between the two leagues are all SPL clubs, meaning that overall, the MLS teams are stronger and the league is far more balanced. We'll come back to this later, for sure, but first. So has it broken into the markets around the globe? Yes and no, as far as I can tell. I'm curious, actually. Let me know in the comments what the situation is as far as the broadcasting rights for the SPL in your respective countries. Yes, I have read online about the various deals that the league cut with broadcasters worldwide, but I'm curious as to what those deals really look like in practice for the average viewer in a given country. How often are you actually seeing these matches and deciding to tune in? As I said in the intro, here in Canada, DAZN has the broadcasting rights. They paid $500,000 to the Saudi Pro League to have the rights in Canada, the UK, Germany, Austria, and Belgium. And even DAZN, they don't really push to market the matches on their own platform. You have to scroll all the way to the far, far right to even see the link to the league. And even in clicking on the SPL page on DAZN, you will not find any of the teams outside of the PIF clubs playing. The 3 marquee matches that you will see every single week will only involve Al Nassr, Al Hilal, Al Ali, and Al Ittihad. So there is at least far more access to the Saudi Pro League matches internationally than there was before. But access doesn't equate to people watching something. Technically, billions of people around the world could access my YouTube videos, but I only ever get into the 5-digit numbers, you know? So the actual viewership numbers, when they are released, will be very interesting to see for the SPL. Now, as far as actual match attendance, in the first month of fixtures, the SPL reported a 24% increase in attendance. That's pretty great, isn't it? 24% is a massive jump. Think of your salary if it was increased by 24%. You know, that'd be great. I'd love that. However, in going through the various attendance numbers on Transfermarkt, beyond the likes of Al Ali and the various PIF clubs seeing marked increases, the rest of the teams that didn't splash the cash on notable players, let's take Al FC as an example. Last season, their average home attendance was 4,398. This season, 4,798. So an increase of about 400 spectators, and predictably those numbers increased the most when they hosted one of the big 4. Other than that, not so much. Damak, one of the more competitive teams, are averaging 5,537 spectators this season, while last season they averaged 3,689. Hey, that's a solid increase. Al Riyadh, who are just behind them in the table, 4,715 last season, 6,605 this season. However, it must be noted, matches against Al Hilal and Al Nassr saw them bring in 20.6 thousand and 19.7 thousand supporters respectively, while their matches against non-PIF teams would see them bring in just less than 4,000 supporters in attendance, sometimes as low as 1,520, as was the case in their match against Al Weda. The demographic that a lot of football marketing teams want to convert to supporters are the casual supporters, people who have an interest in football in so much as they will pay money for a marquee event, but won't regularly go to matches between sides that are lower in the league, and they might not even have a favorite team. The data is quite clear here. For the PIF teams, the people will show up. For non-PIF teams, it can get scary. There have been matches such as that between Al Riyadh and Al Khalij where just 144 people turned up. And no, you did not hear me wrong. 144 people. Whereas Al Hilal can get attendances of up to 59,000 for their home opener and can flirt with 50K for other high-profile matches. But their average is 28,327 and at times dropping as low as 8,505 depending on who they're playing. So it's as if the PIF teams live in their own bubble when it comes to attendances. If you're playing on one of those teams, everywhere you go, you'll be greeted by pretty strong crowds. If you aren't on one of those teams, well, you may be playing in front of a crowd that has about as many people as I have followers on Instagram. Not much. How does the average attendance compare to other Asian nations? They're still behind the K-League, ISL in India, Chinese Super League, Iran's Persian Gulf Pro League, and the J-League. Those countries have attendance issues in their own rights, but still have a higher average than Saudi Pro League at the moment. So you can see the imbalance in interest and how that causes a problem. It's almost a self-inflicted problem. The big four are a spectacle that people want to see. The rest, not so much, as people want to only spend their hard-earned money on the big games rather than the others. The big four make up 90% of the total attendance for the entire league. 4 teams, 90% of the attendance. Now, like I said in the intro, this is still a new experiment in Saudi Arabia. They're only just 1 year in, and I would be stunned if they didn't change how they are distributing their focus amongst the teams in the division. But we are only speaking of the present right now, as that's all that we can speak of with any sort of certainty. The rest is just speculation. The SPL is a tough sell because for the average viewer outside of Saudi Arabia and for the casual football fan within Saudi Arabia, there isn't anything that ties them to or brings interest to Al-Shabaab, Damak, Al-Aqdoud, or Al-Fayyah. If there aren't any interesting changes to their squad, what would compel the average football fan, both inside and outside of Saudi Arabia, to start watching them when they are a bit of an afterthought for the league itself, and it's plain to see? The SPL released a statement saying how they have grown internationally when it comes to their presence online, their digital presence, thanks to their various clubs attracting interest for their transfer market dealings. That is absolutely a fact. The big 4 teams are for sure on the radar of football fans now. A lot of people who follow football can name the big 4 in Saudi Arabia. But I was reading an article a few months ago by Saudi journalist Wael Jabir, of course, link below for you to check out yourself, and he pointed to the fact that the growth of their international presence is as top-heavy as the league is when it comes to attendance, really, as 94% of the total followers of SPL clubs on social media are thanks to those following the top 4 clubs. The 4 PIF clubs. I feel for some of these clubs that share a city with the likes of Al-Nassr and Riyadh, for example. Take a look at this map. You have Al-Nassr and Al-Hilal in close proximity, then Al-Riyadh and Al-Shabaab more on the outskirts of the town. Not only are those 2 teams against it when it comes to being in a less central location, but they're also against it with the lack of investment in their squads. Granted, Al-Shabaab had a few nice signings like Yannick Carrasco this past summer. Ever Banega has been there since 2020. But that pales in comparison to Al Hilal and Al Nassr, who have almost entirely foreign 11s that they field. Bringing in genuine star players to Al Hilal, Al Ittihad, Al Nassr, and Al Ali will bring more of a curiosity to those teams for the league's target markets, the casual fan in the country and the curious football fan outside of it. But instead of lifting the entire league, they're lifting those 4 teams into the spotlight. If you were to spread the wealth, quite literally, when speaking of the public investment fund, it would make the league far more interesting. But at the moment, you can see how having the investment focus simply on the top 4 teams has hurt the league. It's not very competitive. The one outlier in the standings is Al Tawun. Shout out to them. They aren't a PIF club, and yet they're above Al Ittihad at the moment. In my non-professional opinion, by investing in the teams that were already popular and the most successful, it seems like their focus right now is clearly on attracting interest internationally, which they have done to an extent, as the whole world has sort of gone, well, hey, looky here. But you're drawing people to the clubs that were popular already in the first place. And while the less popular clubs have seen some spillover effect when the big boys come to town, as we've seen, there have been some shocking attendance numbers and even some fluctuations for Al Hilal, the team that pulls in the highest average attendance. That start with almost 60,000 in attendance was great, but even for them, matches against teams outside of the top 5, which is the Big 4 plus Al Tawun, have most often failed to break 20,000 supporters. That's about a third of the stadium's capacity. Similarly, you can understand why international broadcasters aren't interested in airing anything other than the Big 4 teams, which, if things don't change as far as investment into clubs outside of the Big 4, then the gap between the notoriety and interest in the Big 4 compared to the rest of the league will continue to grow and grow to the point where the league will become less and less interesting, with a similar problem to that of Portugal, for example. Only Sporting, Benfica, or Porto are going to win the league year upon year. The gap between those 3 clubs and the rest of the league is way too big. Granted, this is a problem that actually many leagues are running into nowadays in Europe, but with the SPL and the state-funded clubs, it's exacerbated that further, as it essentially has become a pay-to-win model where the favored children live in their own bubble, both competitively, financially, and even attendance-wise. That's where there's a difference between the SPL and the European leagues, however. For the most part, while the same clubs may win the league over and over, attendance at matches for teams up and down the league is fairly high and consistent as well. And again, that's not true for every single team in the top 5 leagues. Of course, there are teams in Italy or Spain or what have you who struggle to fill a stadium when there isn't a big team coming to town. But in general, the average is higher. And finally, I think that there's the cold hard fact that the league has to accept right now. Overall, the football just isn't at a level that is appealing to watch for most people. I live in Canada, for example. I watch the Premier League, the Portuguese League, basically the top 5 leagues in Europe, as well as MLS. The league that's ranked 12 places above the Saudi League in this moment, by the way. If I wanted to watch some lower level football, I would go to some Canadian Premier League games, and I myself enjoy it because I have a personal connection to it. It's nowhere near the top football I watch from Europe. Hell, not even close to that of Saudi Arabia. But I can look past it because of said connection and a desire to see the game grow in my country. I can look past the level. For most of the world, that connection doesn't exist with the SPL. And so if you're lacking in that connection, how do you rope people in? With the quality of the football. So until the quality of the rest of the league improves greatly, there are very little motivating factors to tune in. Anyway, I didn't follow the Chinese Super League as closely back in the day, and by that I mean the success of it, not from the analyzing the best teams and tactics viewpoint. And so with the SPL, I'm going to keep a closer eye on its growth and how they look to change things to attract the world. It's a tough ask. If the reaction to the Super League tells you anything, it's that people like football as is, and if you're going to challenge the status quo, then you better be offering an incredible product. They aren't yet. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the holidays, are enjoying the holidays, and have a happy new year, and I'll see you in 2024. Ciao.